What's your
I,
question, Smiley?
I said, what is evil?
What is
Like, is it
evil?
in...
What is evil? Is your
Ooh,
question?
Yeah.
I mean, I
very
guess I don't know that I know enough philosophy to
It's the
go all into
opposer.
that, but I feel like it could be seen as
It's the
like
opposition.
yeah, it could be seen as like the lack of good, I guess.
Oh.
I was gonna say like evil is pretty much like the sin of God, or like sin towards God. So like whatever God rejects as like pure to Him, like what's not good. It's like
Yeah.
I
I wouldn't
think that's
say that. I would
the
say
idea.
it's inflicting harm on another being, because the problem with the Christian text, not only the Christian text, this is my opinion, obviously, but the Abrahamic text is that things are carried out which people, the overwhelming majority of humanity, would identify as evil. You know, killing. There's rape. There's everything you can think of in there. Stealing. Um, Obviously, most human beings recognize these things as being bad.
I'd say
Curiosity.
negativity is evil. Negativity, pure negativity is evil.
Are those
Positivity
are
is
those
good.
things of God though?
What?
Hmm?
Negativity?
No, like what he just said, like the rape and stuff. Did God condone that, or was he
No,
pointing
because
out that the people made these mistakes and turned their backs on God, rather than showing his religion to be something of pure and good, but pointing out the inequities of man and how he's gone and rescued them?
no,
Stories require
because
adversity.
within the Jewish and Christian texts, and also in Islam, concubinage is allowed. And to me, concubinage is rape, because concubines cannot consent, given the um given the unbalance of power. Like, you have someone who's essentially a slave and someone who's an owner. So when you have imbalance of power to that degree, then you can't say someone's consented, like, to having sex. So to me, any sex with a concubine is
Yeah.
rape,
So,
essentially.
Belly Bulger, do you
I
know
agree.
anywhere in the Bible where it says that concubinage is allowed?
Yeah, everywhere. And even prophets had
Could you
concubines.
give what?
No.
Yeah, but you're thinking of people who have concubines, but that's a lot different from there
Yeah,
being
but if you
any.
have concubines and you have children with them, then clearly some kind of sexual
Well,
activity took
well,
place,
the
right?
Bible records a lot of imperfect people and doesn't claim that we should be doing everything that they're doing. In fact, it implies and outright suggests
But there were
often that we
prophets who
shouldn't
had
be doing.
concubines, right?
What
And
did you
these
say?
prophets are venerated.
Which prophets had concubines?
Solomon, Abraham,
Solomon was not a
also.
prophet; he was a king.
He wasn't he a prophet in in Islam?
No,
I know he's a prophet.
no,
Dawood.
no.
Yeah,
You're talking about King Solomon, which was the son of David. He was the king, and he actually
Suleiman.
it was his inequity that caused the separation of Israel
So is
from
Solomon not a prophet
and
in?
Judea to Israel. No,
Belly for
he's
Is
not a
truth.
Solomon
prophet.
a prophet?
He was
There's
a
actually
king.
a
No,
there's actually a passage in the Bible that says something about how like Solomon, kind of fell into wickedness in part because he took so many wives. What is one verse in the
hmm
Bible? And I'm paraphrasing that a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
So is
well,
he seen as a bad? Because I know in Islam he's a prophet, right?
right. So in the
And he's
right.
also
Bible,
venerated in Judaism as well.
the Bible recognizes that everyone is imperfect to a large degree, not just, surface level, oh, I told a little white lie once, but David, Solomon, everyone but Jesus in the Bible really has some major sin issues that need to be dealt with. And it
Yeah.
doesn't shy away from
But
kind
in
of
the
presenting
Bible,
them
it
as that.
actually gives instructions of how to deal with concubines and slaves, and it doesn't
Right.
condemn it. It's actually
hmm
condoned. There's just some kind of, you could say, legislation around it, but it's not condemned.
Right.
It's okay. Like, it was practiced throughout you could say, the ages.
Right. Well, it never says that
And Yeah.
it's okay, but it does give legislation for practices that are already there to try to make them more
Yeah.
just or
But
more
I believe
fair.
that a good God would just outright um this what's the word I'm looking for? Ban it.
Uh-huh.
But the thing
Yeah.
is, though, God didn't make slavery. We did, and He gives us free will. Doesn't want to take away our free will, so He wouldn't just
No,
do
but
that.
God could, just like the Ten Commandments, God could have had a commandment saying, "Thou shalt have no
So
concubines."
Yeah,
Right?
but would they obey it?
also
Then it's up to them
understand
at that point.
in the Hebrew language they don't have the word employee. So when you own or you have property, right? And you are agricultural, because this is not the time now where you can dial up and order a pizza or have food delivered to your house. These were a people that relied on the moon and the stars and the seasons to grow crop and to grow cattle. So when they had people come on their property, it was more so to help them, assist them with growing more crops. And what you do is you would teach them how to grow crops and they would pay you back that servitude for that. So it's like me joining the military. I'm owned by the military. I cannot quit. I cannot stop. I have to pay my service to them, but I'm not a slave. But the term employee or in term of service is the best way to describe it is slave, but it's not the same term that we use it today. So you're using the ideology of the way the Westerners had slaves in and how the treatment of the slaves were back of this era, and you're comparing it to the slaves of the biblical era, which is completely different. Yes, there were slaves like the Westerners, like the Egyptians, who actually oppressed those people. But God actually said, listen, if you're going to have these people that are going to pay you or work on your property, and you're going to teach them this, and they're going to pay you back by doing this, then there's certain laws that you need to abide by doing this. So they were the only people that actually had laws that dealt with slavery, where the Egyptians had no law to their slavery. They just beat him to death. And in fact, Moses killed a man that was beating one of those, and he had to flee to Egypt or flee to the desert for 40 years. So I mean, each and every one of these characters in the Bible is not for us to emulate, but for us to relate to. That nothing that you can possibly do will separate you from God's love. There's incest, there's rape, there's murder. All of these things are in the Bible, and they're to show us that God's love is beyond what we can recognize.
But what I have a difficulty reconciling is the fact that God would not just outright condemn these things and say, don't do X, don't do Y, don't do Z. Well, he did say, don't do X, Y, Z, but for completely different things, and some things that are really like trivial, like not doing certain things on certain days. But he didn't decide, you know what, maybe there's things that are more pressing, like condemning and condoning slavery. I would,
Well, so
that's kind of
Belly
puzzling.
for Truth, I think this is going back to what Humble Tracker was saying, but I mean, slavery again, it's a different than the slavery that we think most readily in our context of American slavery, but there could be value to institutions of slavery in the ancient Near East. Like for example, if people were like destitute and in debt, they could sell themselves into slavery and actually be better off. Like they were destitute and now they have a place to serve and to live, and it was genuinely an institution that could be helpful to people, which is why people sold themselves into slavery. It's why people sold their children into slavery. And slavery, even, you could use the word servanthood or indentured servitude.
Yeah,
That might be closer, but
you could get out of slavery too.
I mean, even the Bible recognizes in some of its laws, you can tell that it seemed to be at least a possibility for slaves to recognize that they had it good in their enslavement. So, like, for example, there's laws about if a slave's time to be freed comes up and he doesn't want to be freed, but he wants to stay in his master's house, he has some laws to be able to do that, which just shows that slavery is not like it's definitely not like it was in the American South. There
Because
are
in the
avenues.
Bible, right,
Do what?
if a slave wanted to essentially stay with his master, but
Right.
then basically there was reasons why he would want to do that, like usually to do with family. Like what they would do is in the Israelite Bible, it's saying you have to like mark him, like it's so essentially like an animal. So you have to brand the slave. Uh, So I'm thinking, what kind of God would think that's okay to
Well, I don't
brand
think there's
another human
any.
being?
I don't think there's any branding in the Bible. I
No,
could be wrong about
it's
that.
no. He can choose to have an awning in his nose. You know how women like it's real popular right now
Like
for
a
people to
bull,
put
like a cow.
the rings through their nose.
I thought it was an ear
Um,
piercing. Is it a nose piercing?
I think
You can do
I could
both.
look it up.
I thought it was
But
a
Like
yeah,
piercing to the ear.
it's a
mutilation.
choice though. It's not a
I mean,
it,
it's mutilation, right? It's like,
Oh, yeah, but
and
also, but what
also
you're saying,
he's
Oh, is
essentially lower than the master because
it was protection.
that's
right.
what they do to bulls.
It was protection because people could like in the area like the Medios and the Persians, what they if they saw somebody free and they were going to take them as a slave, they would see that that this man bared a mark, and that if they took this man, they would actually be stealing, and this was a big deal because if you stole or if you did anything and you were found, you would have to repay that person twofold.
Mm.
So like
So they're a
stealing was a big
property,
deal. So
right?
when you right. That, like again, I'm not in the military. I was the property of the U.S. government,
No,
but I
but that's
wasn't a
different,
slave.
right?
No, it's not.
Because it
It's
is different.
absolutely the
with
same. No, it's not.
benefits.
It's
It's not.
absolutely the
It's not.
same.
It's
I
not the
couldn't
same
I
because
couldn't make marks on my body. They controlled me. They
yeah, but
literally
the thing is,
controlled
you could
everything that I
leave,
did, and I can get in.
right?
No, no. So you're trying to put today's philosophy in the philosophy of the the Bible, where people actually. I mean, you cannot. We are such a different culture than we were back then. Like even
Yeah, we're
200 years
different
ago,
because we realized that
Be-
these things were wrong.
Billy, 200 years ago, if you challenged my honor, I could take you out in the street and shoot you down, and it was legal. But so you see where nobody thought anything different of it. Raymond Burr
Yeah, but
killed Thomas Jefferson in a legal duel, and he didn't get in
yeah,
trouble for it. It was
yeah,
so the there's a big difference between the culture we are now and the culture that were back then.
yeah. But our all-knowing, all-good God would be ahead of the time, right? He would know that these things are wrong, right?
Right.
He would know this because it's God. We're not talking about
Yeah.
human being, right? Obviously, I think a human wrote it, so
Yeah. I think
a
that's a
human
decent point,
a
Belly
human
for
at the
Truth. I mean,
in that time would exactly write what's written in the Bible. But all-knowing, all-powerful
um,
God that transcends time, all good God also wouldn't write such a thing.
so I would
That's my
agree
belief.
and disagree with you because I think that the Bible, when you look at it in comparison to other documents that time, other law like documents, there it does seem to have much more rights for slaves than others, and I think that comes out of its theology of every human being made in the image of God. So I do think it does seem ahead of its time in comparison with other documents, but at the same time, I think it is it is a problem worth raising. Like, why didn't God just outright ban it? I think part of that
Mm,
is, like we said, about there being a utility to slavery, to the type of slavery that was in that context, and a goodness
mm,
to it, to some degree. But also, I think the Christian understanding is that just like God is patient with us in our individual lives and kind of will reveal things to us that are wrong. Like when I first became a Christian, I knew some things were wrong, and I grew in like not doing those things anymore. But then later down the line, I found out, wow, this is probably wrong too, and I never even realized it, before this point. So just like God is patient with us in our individual walks, I think he has been patient with humanity in our overarching story, to where there has been a progression of his revelation, as far as his law. So I think all of those things working together, it provides for me what is a satisfactory answer. Although you still have to wrestle with like why didn't you just like somehow implement a more perfect society? But we don't know what was achievable by human means. Obviously, God could have done a miracle, but I don't think God is just gonna necessarily
Yeah.
do mass miracles like every single day just to change an ancient society like that. Like,
Because for me, out of all of the Christian doctrines, right, what makes obviously a lot of the gospel, a lot of these texts have been were destroyed by the Catholic Church. Obviously, I'm not a Christian; I'm an agnostic. But the Gnostics made a lot of sense to me, just because their idea that this world was created by an evil being just made sense, just because obviously they would have seen all of the suffering around them, because they believe that all of this stuff was created by this evil entity. And don't get me wrong, obviously some of these ideas I'm skeptical about, but it made sense to the degree that I can see why they saw the biblical teach. Obviously, if they saw all the slavery in it and
right.
God wiping out the Amalekites, like killing babies and and women and men, and then like you got the Israelite story where God frees them from Egypt, but then he tells them to go
Right.
and slaughter the inhabitants of Israel. It's like, what kind of good God would think this is cool, like this is okay, right? And they were probably looking at this and probably a bit puzzled, like,
Yeah.
well, hang on, you're saying that this good God said to do these things? So I can see why they thought that the being that this book was allegedly written by wasn't good at all.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah. I
see
mean, I
the
can
I
I can
can
see.
basically I can see the rationale, like I can
Yeah.
see the thought
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. I
It
can
makes
see
more
how
sense
that.
to me than them saying that a good God said slavery is okay. A good God killed a bunch of babies. That just doesn't compute. It just doesn't make sense. It's like saying that a serial killer is actually a very great guy. Like, how? Like, it just doesn't. My
Uh-huh.
logic
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the
can't put it together.
traditional like Christian conception is that like God has the right to do certain things with his creation that obviously people don't have the right to do. So like I can't just kill anybody because I'm not their creator and I don't have a right to do anything with them really. Uh unless, it's given to me somehow. But God has created everyone and everything. He's the only reason anything is sustained in its life or in its existence at any point. Uh, and so he has the basic right to take it out of existence or to cease from sustaining it at any point. Uh, and especially if we see human beings as having souls that will be, translated to an afterlife, um, not necessarily, distinguished or extinguished or, you know, uh, deprived of something like, then I just don't think it becomes as big of a deal. Like, I think it's a bigger deal to someone who doesn't see, like, to someone who sees this life as it, and this life is where you're going to have most of your pleasures and most of, the things you're going to be able to accomplish and whatever, uh, then it seems like a bigger injustice. But that isn't the Christian worldview. So in the Christian worldview, it's it's less of a problem, I guess.
Interesting. It's because the point you were making where you're saying, oh, God has the right to do it because it created it, right? To me, it's a little troubling. Like, for example, take this analogy. Let's say human beings came to a point where they could create sentient robots, and then you could have your own, let's say, your own little robot
Hmm.
planet in an aquarium, but they were sentient. They could suffer, and then you had this population in the aquarium, and they were suffering, and all kinds of atrocities were taking place, and but you decided that this is how you wanted it to be, and you were just observing it, looking
Yeah.
at this tank, but then your friends had their tanks, and none of this stuff was going on because obviously they're the god of that tank, so they made sure that it was peaceful,
Yeah.
it was heavenly, there was no suffering going on, but you were just there just looking at it and letting it go on. Then I think the other guys will go, hang on a minute, that's wrong, like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
need to intervene and
So
stop this from happening. And if you then went in and start bashing them
right.
with your fist, they'll think you're a maniac, right?
Right. So
Even though you essentially, let's say, you created them or you own them, they would still see it as being wrong, even though they were technically your possessions, like your creations.
yeah. So I think that number one, I would be very skeptical that we could ever make sentient life
Yeah,
because
it's just an analogy, right?
right.
That's
So let me
it.
first just
Yeah.
address it from that perspective. Like I think our hardware is way too complex to get to that. But not only that, as a Christian, I think uh,
I
you
think
have to.
so as well,
I think
but
you have to add
it's
a
just an
soul to
analogy.
it to get sentience. But with that being said, uh, I mean, I guess that kind of that kind of makes it just an impossibility. But I wouldn't have a problem with destroying an advanced robot that we had created at all because it's not made in the image of God. It's our creation. It's a thing, not a person. And that gets
Yeah,
back
but
again to
if it
not
could
really thinking
suffer,
that
right?
sentience is a thing that we can.
But the thing is, if it could suffer, right, and it could feel, and it knew what it is,
Uh huh.
to, let's say, we don't know for certain, right? Because to be honest, we can only know our own consciousness. I can't even know if you're conscious. Obviously, I can infer it from behavior,
Uh huh.
from the way you interact, and I can say, okay, that guy is most likely conscious, but I can't know for certain. I can only know on my own, right? So let's say these robots were created, you wouldn't know for certain, but if they were to exhibit behaviors that made you think they were conscious, then I think the right thing to do would be to treat them as if they were conscious, regardless of whether they were conscious or not. But the whole theme, the whole reason I brought it up in the first place was just to drive home an analogy that just
Mm-hmm.
because you create something doesn't make it okay to torture it, or to kill it, murder it. It's not. It doesn't. It's
Yeah.
not a
Yeah.
justification.
So maybe I think you're right in a sense that just because God is creator of things, that doesn't give him the right to do injustice to things. Um, because primarily because he is a just God. I mean, uh, in a sense, you could almost argue that being the creator of something does give you the right to do injustice. But I think for God, even as the creator, by by destroying something that he's created, I don't think he is doing injustice to it. I think is the main thing. Like I think you're thinking of in terms of like you're doing an injustice to something when you like, are destroying it if it's sentient. But I just don't think that is the case with God, who takes
Yeah.
something out of
No.
existence
No.
that
Because
he
if
made.
let's say let's say we have the ability to do something similar, right? Create something sentient, and then people just decided to create something sentient just to kill it. I think most people would be against that. Like, if let's say we had the ability and then people just started making babies just to murder them, just for fun, right?
Uh huh.
Even though we made them, um, he made them himself
Right.
using
Right.
the tools that were available, most people they would be against that, right?
Right.
Even
But
though
again,
he
I think,
technically created the baby and owns it.
yeah,
Like
I think
if
one
if you're
difference,
creating them just to kill them,
yeah,
you'd be seen as an evil person.
right. I think one difference though is that like you're using terms like, doing it just for fun or creating them just to kill them. But I don't think that like it doesn't appear to me that anybody that God has commanded, to be killed or to, die or whatever it may be, it doesn't seem like he's doing it just for fun. It doesn't seem like he has created them just to do that to them. It seems like their life has more purpose than that. Even if it's an infant, even if there's an infant who gets sick and dies. I mean, you could look at David's infant who dies because of his sin. God didn't do that
Because
just
of
for
his what?
fun, and he
Sin.
didn't make the child just to destroy it, right? I mean, that child had a soul that moved into the afterlife. And it also, that child, it accomplished something in its significance for David and in its lesson that it taught to
But it's
David.
incredibly cruel to do something like that. That's why I can understand the Gnostic
But
point of view.
why
That
do you
if
think
there
it's
is a
cruel?
creator of this world,
Because I don't think it's
that
very cruel.
it's not, it can't be good.
Why would you say it's cruel to do something like that?
So if you have a baby, right? So
Right.
you obviously an all-powerful God would know everything. So it
Right.
would know that there will be a baby that will be born, and then it will kill it, or it will get cancer, or whatever. Obviously, if you believe in a creator God, then you believe that God let that happen, allowed the baby to have the cancer, or in the
Right.
Old Testament, God directly wipes out, kills infants, right? So why did God decide to do that? Why not just stop the infants from coming into existence in the first place, so they didn't have to experience being wiped out by some almighty force?
Because
Can
I
I
think there
answer that?
was. Yeah, sure.
Can I
And
answer
actually,
that with a Bible verse?
well, actually, I have to
Okay, yeah, I
go,
got
so
a.
y'all take it over. Thanks
Okay.
for being so
Hold
friendly,
on.
though.
Hold on, wait.
I'm gonna
No,
add
wait,
you,
wait.
Belly for sure.
Wait, Colin, hold on, Colin.
No, you got it. I
I need.
trust you. I really got to go. I'm like
Just hold
already
on
way
real
over.
quick.
All right, read the Bible
I
verse.
need you to
I'll
hear
listen
this
to the
shit.
Bible
Okay,
verse.
here it is.
Yeah,
Isaiah
there's two parts
55
of
and
what you're
verse
talking about.
8 through
There's
9.
the
It says
children that were
this.
Hey,
killed
humble
by the
check.
two
For my
bears.
thoughts
I don't know
are
if you
not
have this guy
your
muted,
thoughts.
Prophecy 3, but he's reading something.
Yeah, he does have me muted, man. This
Oh,
guy,
okay.
he's
Let me
a coward,
let me
man. Like
just
he
listen
always
to him
he mutes
read
me.
something, and then
Okay,
I'm gonna go.
okay. All right, so it says Isaiah 55 and verse 8, and this is for a belly full of truth. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, said the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So basically, the Lord is saying whatever He
All
does
right, I
is
think
what He
that's a
does,
good verse.
right?
I'm gonna go though. Thanks everybody.
Thank you, Colin.